Hey, this is Amrita Bradley, and I'm the creator of Breaking Boxes. And today we have a really special guest. We have Ange Davidson, and Angie's someone I met recently, and she was telling me when we met all about some studies that she'd been doing. And it was funny because when she first told me what she was doing, she had said that she was doing peace studies, but I thought she said she was doing bee studies, as in the insects, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And then she goes, no, not bee studies, peace with a P, not a B. Anyway, funny. All right, so Edge, with that introduction, why don't you, tell us a little bit about you and what you've been up to.
Yeah, sure. Um, so yeah, for the last 4 years or 4 and a bit years, I've been studying peace studies um, remotely through the University of New England up in Armidale in New South Wales. Yeah, it's been a really amazing period, actually. I had all of the COVID lockdowns here in Melbourne, homeschooling my two children and also studying full time. So it was a really busy house. But I think I really made use of our lockdown time really well. And I managed to, finish my degree 3 weeks ago.
What is peace studies? Like, what do you actually learn?
Yeah, so it's a really broad degree in a sense. If initially you're really learning about global systems and the way the world works and the way it's connected through globalization, for example, the political structures of the world, and also sociology, philosophy, Indigenous studies, environmental peace is a big part as well. Creating cultures of peace. So in local communities, and then spanning out broader to the national level, and then impacting at a global level. So it's a really broad degree in that you're covering a lot of topics. So it makes it very intense in a way in terms of learning, because you're not zooming in on one specific area. You're covering a really broad area, and you do diving into areas through your assignments, but it's really fast paced, and you've really got to keep on top of the work to be able to understand actually what are the problems.
Really changing, wouldn't it? As like almost
Yeah,
as fast as the 7 o'clock news tells you there's something going on,
yeah, it
you have to
is.
be like, okay, well, how has this changed from, where it was, I don't know, maybe even 24 hours ago, let alone 6 months or a couple of years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. It changes a lot in some respects, but for me, learning and studying this, I really realized that the actual roots of the problem are very similar. In fact, they're mostly the same. So a lot of these problems that we're facing in the world, they really come back to individual people. And every time I'd study a subject, I'd cut it up into so many different ways to try and find the problem and the how of fixing it, because peace studies is not prescriptive. It's not setting you up with, okay, in this instance, this is the flow chart you follow to create a peaceful society. It's learning the problems, but then the how and the what of change is something that is left for you to explore. So it's a really empowering degree in a way, because you have a lot of knowledge, and then you can create programs that you feel fit for whatever your interest area is.
So, and from what you're telling me so far, this is really huge. Peace studies can be anything from, how we act as a community to how we act, globally, environmentally, in regards to, anything from, different religions getting along to, war, food, security, heaps of stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It is all of those things. And the displaced, like if you look at war, it's also about displacement and refugees, and what supports are given to these people. But also there's the grassroots support, so the help that's given in the moment, and then there's the peacemaking processes and programs that are created on top of that to maintain that. And then there's also systemic change. So why is the war occurring in the first place? So there's lots of layers to it. And depending on the route that you take, will depend on what your interest area, but then the type of influence that you'll have in society. So you could work for the United Nations, for example. You could become a diplomat. You could work also at a community level and creating cultures of peace within the communities that you live in. And for me, my interest area is at the grassroots level, but a little bit different to those areas, in that I'm interested in creating inner peace within people, because for me, the unit of peace is the person. And as a collective, we create violence. Individually, we create violence as well. But as a collective, we create violence, which creates the systems that potentially aren't working, that need to be reformed. And for me, the ability to reform a system, if you work backwards, comes back to the person. And creating inner peace within a person, then they'll radiate that out into the world. So that's my area of interest, whereas someone else may be interested in becoming a diplomat.
That is so huge right there and then. So there is so much conflict in the world. And so what I'm hearing you say that if we're going to change these big issues, it really starts with everyone as an individual becoming, at peace with themselves, understanding, their relationship, having a relationship with other people, with the environment. I think some of the reasons that we come into conflict is that we don't see other people equal to ourselves, whether that be gender and domestic violence, whether that be religions, and who's got right to what land, and who's God chose or who God prefers over another group, resources, all those sorts of things. So it's it always seems like a topic that is unresolvable, because there are so many of us. We all have so many different views on different things, but when we bring it down to the fundamentals, if we bring it right down to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we're all just trying to survive on have I got enough food? Have I got enough water? Have I got enough shelter? And those things alone, if we look at, COVID and, when the supply chain stopped and all of a sudden everybody started running out for toilet paper, I sort of find that just quite funny, because, it was a respiratory multi-organ type disease as opposed to, it's opposed to a gastric disease. But anyway, in saying that, where do we start, Ange? Where do we start with trying to bring peace to the world?
I think, to your point that you were just mentioning then about it is so big and there's all these different, everyone has a different viewpoint, and we're all, when you referred to Maslow's hierarchy, want enough food, want shelter, and to sustain our basic needs. I think that's definitely true. However, it's the process of achieving those means and understanding that that process could become more peaceful. So we want a house, for example, to live in, but the means by which we achieve that house is the actual conduit, if you like, of violence. All the things that we step on in the process to achieving that house is everyday violence. So in order to create that possibility, how can we do that in a way that is non-violent, be that non-violent communication, be that the use of power? The use of power is a big one, and how that's misconstrued and used to dominate. How can we be more compassionate? How can we be more loving? How can we be more creative within ourselves to create these communities and have this imagined possibility that actually we can do this? And I think that's a big thing with this degree. It's very empowering. So there are so many possibilities. But every time I look at it, it comes back to the person, and it comes back to how we step outside of our front door every day and interact with the world, and how inside of our houses we interact with the people we live with.
What do you mean by that? Can you expand on how we interact with ourselves and the people around us? Like, let's start with our own individual families, and then we'll expand out from there.
So another part of what I've been studying, so I've been studying peace studies, but at the same time, I've also been working to become a Vedic meditation teacher, which I will become next year. So for me, having these two Eastern and Western theories being studying at the same time was actually really amazing, because I could really see how they would fit together in our world and in our culture. So if we look at, say, for example, if we look inside the home and we have a family and we have small children and they're everything's really busy and quite stressful, and the kids are being spoken to probably in ways that parents don't wish to, but they are, or they're being introduced to topics that potentially aren't very peaceful and quite violent, and they might be in a family of violence where the parents aren't getting along. And then if we take all of those emotions of children and the parents as well, if they're in that conflict, and we look at how that affects the physiology and the brain of those people, and wires, neurons and pathways in the mind that become hardwired in as we get older and older and older, and those people aren't able to express themselves and understand their emotions or have any tools to bring themselves back to who they are, then as they grow and they step outside and they go to school and they interact with the world, it can become normalized that a certain level of violence is actually acceptable. And if we can bring people to that place of calmness, if their nervous system is rested and it's not stressed and it's peaceful and there's a beautiful environment in homes, then people are going to go out into the world and radiate that, and they're going to influence the other people around them to also become less stressed and less anxious and more peaceful. And it's going to create these societies of inclusion, not exclusion, and it's going to create a level of calmness rather than fear. So I think it all starts on the inside for each person, and it starts within the home, and then we move out into the world.
So, Ange, I want to know, do you think people can change? So my experience has been, I think people get to a certain level of comfort or familiarity in their life, and then they lock into that. And when they lock into that, you know, any new ideas, any social change becomes difficult. So, what are your thoughts on being able to change as we get older?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there. And I think there's definitely validity in that changing those values and being willing and perceptive and open to change and doing work on yourself is a lot of what it is too. Like being to be able to be open, you need to have a level of curiosity and you need to be able to want to have that. So for some people that won't be the case, and that's absolutely, I think, true and valid. For others, there are people that are looking, they just haven't potentially found the right option and the right thing for them. But to your point, like, I completely acknowledge that is the case. And a lot of what I want to do and the spaces that I want to work with are with children for those reasons. So children are the next generation, and the world that they're exposed to at the moment has so much stress and pressure, and there's a lot happening for young children. There's a lot that they're navigating through. And for me, if I can work with them to help them create support and safety and stability within themselves so that they can digest life, I feel that is where my work will be. And then they will hopefully go out and radiate this newness to the people that potentially, like their parents, who may not be as receptive and open, and maybe show them that actually this is actually really cool and you can do this and it's actually easy if you want to.
So in my work, you know, I have a lot of kids that are in tough environments. It may be an environment where it may be domestic violence, you know, drug and alcohol abuse. You know, there's a whole heap of situations that can make it tough for kids. So if they're not getting that sense of peace or sense of security from their primary environment, from their primary carers, how would you go about supporting these children to live in a peaceful manner if that's not what they're being taught?
One will be education of peace and how to create that culture for those who are willing, and the other one will be teaching meditation. So I think for those children, and they have to want to select in as well, it's a self-selecting model, being given a tool and the capacity to calm their own nervous system and be able to reach out for assistance. And my work would need to link in quite closely with, different service providers.
So schools, community centres, that kind of neighbourhood houses.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And create these environments where these kids do feel safe, that they can come to, and that can be supportive for them as they grow, if that's what they choose. Because a lot of times your heart breaks for these children, but at the same time, they need to also be willing and want to be involved in what this is. So, there'll be lots of education and lots of potential for these children to self-select. But, if they're not wanting to, it's a support that's available, but I can't make them do it. So it is a tricky one in terms of having that right level of support and linking in with services, and then also respecting their family environment. And as they grow stronger within themselves and become more confident in who they are and what they're about, then they will have a voice as well. So they will be able to, problem solve themselves. Our children are everything, and setting them up for success and giving them opportunities to be who they are, because in a lot of these environments, be it emotional abuse or alcohol or whatever it is, these children, they aren't seen for who they are. And my big passion is for them to reach their potential, regardless of the environment that they're in. So they have that real, strong sense of who they are, and they can go out into the world and they can participate and interact and have so much fun, because the world is amazing. If you can see it through a nervous system that's not stressed, like it is, it's amazing. That's a
really good point. Like how one person sees, let's just take something really interesting like ice cream. Okay, so you can take some ice cream and go, wow, chocolate, delicious. I love the sweetness and everything else about ice cream. And then another person can look at that same ice cream and go, no, it's cold, don't like it, it's wet, makes my nose cold. And it's a completely different reaction for the same item. So, for the same object. So that object really is perceived by the person holding it, not the actual object itself. So
the world's all perception. And the way we see it is, like, from my perspective, the way we view the world is a direct reflection of our nervous system. So if our nervous system is stressed, we won't see the beauty in everything and everybody. But as we calm our nervous system down, we start to see the most amazing things. And I have completely been through this myself, so I can speak from firsthand experience. You just see beauty in the most amazing places that you have never seen before. And so it's such an amazing gift. And I feel like this tool it's completely transformational. It's transformed my life, and I can't imagine what it would do to children and everybody else out there if they had access to it and they were really shown that it's just such a simple technique.
Well, I reckon between you and I, we can give everybody access to this, even at just an introductory level. We can get this message out. We can get everybody's nervous systems calmed and ready to receive and see all the good stuff. Ange, I'm a little bit curious about history repeating. So I remember, watching the news over several years, and it seems to just cycle through the same issues. Okay, so we're talking about domestic violence, rape, drug abuse, war. How do we stop this cycle? Because it doesn't seem that we learn our lesson, isn't it? I mean, anybody I think who's been to war or been abused or had, some kind of trauma will tell you that they wouldn't wish it on their worst enemy, right? They want it to stop. It's not an enjoyable thing. It's not the way forward. Yet we still seem to keep repeating these same issues over and over again. And I could almost guarantee you, if I switched on the news tonight, there'll be some version of, one of those topics that are being reported on. How do we stop this? Where do we go?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a big part of it is awareness. So negative peace is the absence of war. So for a lot of people, they consider the world peaceful because we're not at war. Okay. And so that actually has a whole raft of other problems, because underneath all of this, yes, we may not be at war and killing people, but our society is violent. So we have structures and systems within our society that aren't peaceful. However, a lot of the population feel that we are at peace because we're not at war. And then we also have positive peace, which is the absence of war, as well as the cultivation of cultures of peace and non-violence. So a lot of the not-for-profit organisations, a lot of grassroots organisations, a lot of community organisations are attempting to build positive peace and put peacemaking and peace building into societies. However, there's this overarching power that's governing our country and our world, and they have a big part to play in these structures that are violent. So there's peace at the grassroots level, and then there's activists who are resisting the political decisions that are being made, which is very worthwhile. They definitely need to be there. And in both of these ways, we're trying to create a culture of positive peace, and we're trying to create all these communities and turn the ship around, but it is very slow. So it's a systemic solution. And like we mentioned before, there's people that are resisting that. Like, there'll be a lot of people that are potentially not that interested in coming on board this journey. And so it's a very slow process of changing and moving this big ship, which we're all in.
That's an interesting point. The people that aren't interested in coming on the journey, turning the ship, creating peace, right? And I'm pretty sure that we could all kind of pick on a couple of political leaders that are very well known as to being poster people. I was going to say poster boys, but poster people for that. What do we do with these guys? What do we do with, the people that are only interested in gaining more power at the expense of the community?
That's right. It's a big problem. The elite machine, or the military industrial complex, or the corporations that are basically driving the world, more so than the politicians. But I think the biggest thing to take home and for everyone to understand in this conversation is that we all have power, okay, and we have given our power to these corporations. So by choosing to buy products that are coming from these corporations, we are sustaining these structures that cause violence.
Give me an example. What are we buying? What do you know?
Like, for example, fast fashion, consuming all sorts of everything in the shops. They're owned by a small amount of people, a lot of these corporations. And every time we buy these things, we are supporting them to continue to make these decisions where they just keep collecting corporations to build power, and then they influence the government. So
what do we do? What are we meant to buy?
Well, we need to create new communities. So we need to create sustainable communities outside of this, where they're, more of a cooperative type of arrangement. If you look at food, for example, the power, our food, what we're eating, it actually really hurts me. So we eat food that is grown from genetically modified seed, generally, that's sprayed with pesticides, that is sold to us at such a low cost to the farmer that they're barely making an income. There's so much happening in that space. And then we buy these products that are full of pesticides that create disease, that perpetuate a pharmaceutical company. So this is a big chain, for example, but we could just start creating our own veggie gardens and community spaces and feed ourselves and take the power back in our own hands for our food rather than giving it to somebody else. And it's the same in all spaces. So technology, for example, like how often does everyone change everything to get a new upgrade? It's a marketing strategy to keep us feeling like we need more and we need better. But why? So it's questioning why we're buying what we're buying and why we're consuming what we're consuming. And at the end of the day, who we're actually giving our money for and where that's being invested. And it's generally invested in war. So it's a big cycle, but awareness is the key. So the more people that are aware of where their money's actually going and where it's invested, then that's how we can build these new communities.
Okay, so really to bring world peace, right? I mean, I've picked up so much in this conversation already. So number one, from the takeaways that I've got so far, I'm sure there'll be more, but from what I've got so far, one, I need to start with myself, right? I need to calm my nervous system so that when I see the world as a better place, I see the beauty in it. But not only that, that beauty will radiate out from me and affect everybody else that I have contact with. And that will be a bit of a chain reaction. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Then not only that, from a more sort of an environmental level and a community level, just doing something as simple as, growing some of my own food, even if it's just a few lettuce or a few carrot or something, that is going to nourish me, because generally I'm not going to put a whole heap of nasty chemicals on my own produce. Mm-hmm. And then that's then being nourished and being, more healthy means I'm going to be less likely to become sick, and I'm going to be less likely to need pharmaceuticals. Yep. And not only that with my experience with actually growing food has been, if I grow lettuce, for example, I'll get a glut of lettuce, right? Now, I can't eat all that. And I don't know if anyone's tried freezing lettuce. I certainly haven't, but it's not something that's going to last for a very long time. So I'm better off growing, a crop of lettuce or a whole bed of lettuce, taking some for myself and then trading or bartering for someone else who may have grown a glut of carrots or something like that, and doing a bit of a food swap. So I know in my local community we certainly have food swaps, and it's fantastic because you can, put your effort into one thing that you may be good at, but then walk away with a whole heap of other stuff. So yeah, encouraging this. And I suppose also too, from what I'm getting from this conversation, is that the less money I have to spend, right, then that also means that that this is less money that's going to corporations that can be putting their money into all kinds of places that you just wouldn't be aware of. Yeah, that's a bit scary too. Where does all this money go, eh? Who's funding all these things?
Back as well on the point you made about this change. So one thing I'm very conscious of is that a lot of people have a lot of competing priorities on their time, and they aren't able to make these changes. And for them, it seems overwhelming and a really big problem, which I understand.
Where do we start, Ange, when it's too overwhelming?
And that's why, like I mentioned at the start, every time I did a subject, I cut it up to the individual, and it all came back to the nervous system. So if everyone's calm and content in themselves, then and is more creative and has more time in the day because you're not tired, because this meditation just takes so much tiredness out of your body. You have so much more time in the day. So planting those few vegetables and having these conversations with the people in your street to share them and things is so effortless, and it just becomes a way of working. But when you're stressed, it's very difficult to make these changes, and I totally understand that, because your mind is so busy thinking and doing and trying to keep up with other people that you lose that sense of connectedness to everything, because you're too busy grabbing things and wanting something new in your life. And when you look at advertising, it's there for a reason. It's there to create this. It's purposefully creating.
Let's talk a little bit about advertising. I'd love to touch on this with you, Ange. So in my understanding, advertising is about creating sales through also creating want. Okay. Now, also on that same sort of level is that, what do I want? I want to feel happy. I want to feel accepted. I want to feel connected. I want to feel like I've got what I deserve, right? So then we have to delve really deep in, all right? So what is the need that I'm trying to soothe? And in my experience, it comes down to, I don't feel loved. I don't feel connected. I don't feel good enough. Yeah. And I'm trying to temporarily soothe all those feelings of discontent by getting stuff, right? If I get this, I'll be happy. If I get that promotion, I'll be happy. If I, get a date with that guy or girl, I'll be happy, right? I'll be happy when, right? But it's completely flawed, right? It's completely flawed. So let's go back to the earlier ice cream idea, okay? The concept of the ice cream. If objects, and when I say ice cream, I mean objects, right? But if ice cream made everybody happy, then all we'd have to do is give everybody an ice cream, right? But it's not the ice cream that makes everybody happy, right? It's the individual self and the awareness of your own needs that makes you happy. All right. So getting more stuff is never, ever, ever going to work. It's never going to work. What you've got to do is you've got to look at yourself and you just make peace with your, how do I say that? Make peace with your inner peace. Just be happy with yourself.
Corporations are ruling the world, so they need money. So they create their advertising campaigns to make us think that we need all these new things, of which most people keep buying. And then we throw everything out, and that's a whole raft of other problems in landfill, etc., in the oceans. But every time, I feel like you could sort of explain it as society getting under your skin. So it's infiltrating you in all your cells in your mind, and it actually is corroding you, and it's pulling your soul apart, because it's telling you you're worthless and that you don't have value because you aren't wearing these, latest clothes, or you're not doing this, or you're not driving this particular car, or whatever it is. And it creates such a hierarchy in our society of, the people who have and the people who don't, and inequality is widening because of this. But if we are conscious of and aware of our thoughts and aware of what this is actually doing to us and making us feel, because it's not a very nice feeling, and we can pull ourselves up at that point and potentially engage in a technique like Vedic meditation to then pull ourselves back to actually who we are. We're actually a human being, and we are worthy, and we have connections. We just probably can't see them, and we can't feel love because we don't love ourselves. So in order to feel that, you need to be it. And in order to be it, you can't keep letting the world into you in the way that we do. So I think if we can all come back to ourselves and who we are, and be content in who we are, and we are strong in ourselves, like have a real strong sense of self, because a lot of times if you embark on this journey, you are going to hit resistance with your friends and your family and the people you hang around with, because you won't be as relevant to them anymore. And being able to say, you know what, I'm okay with that, because I know that when this door closes, there's a massive, amazing door over there with so many opportunities and so many beautiful people. So it's having that strength of your character to say, hey, I'm actually going to make a change for myself and I'm going to see where that leads me. And if it leads me through all these difficult conversations with people and losing friends and things, I'm okay with that because I love feeling grounded in myself and I love being happy because that's happiness.
Yeah,
It's not.
I can attest to that as well, Ange. I can say there was a lot of people in my life who couldn't let go of their ways. And when I started to look at alternatives and say, hang on a minute, there's another way here because I've tried your way and it's kind of not working. And then as soon as I started going, oh, hang on a minute, this is good. They're like, you're nuts, you're crazy. You need a psychiatrist. And I'm like, you know what? I'm okay with that. I don't need a psychiatrist. I'm not nuts. I'm not crazy, but I'm okay that you don't like my point of view anymore. I'm going find a new bunch of people to hang out with. I'm gonna, it's
And it's just having that sense of knowing that you prefer to feel really amazing in yourself without the need to go out and search for validation. And I mean, what's more empowering than that? It's really necessary and important to acknowledge that we are all different and we're all here for a different reason. So my path is not the same as your path and it's not the same as the person next door's path, but doesn't mean it's wrong. So, you know, we have to support each other and lift each other up and really encourage each other to be that beautiful person that we are and support each other. And I think that makes such a beautiful culture and such a supportive environment. And if people can see this happening, they actually want a bit of it. Like you attract people because they're like, oh, wow, what are you doing? Because you are always so happy and you've got these beautiful people around you and you have such an amazing life. What are you doing?
So, Ange, tell me a little bit about, you know, from where you've been to where you are now. Tell me a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, sure. So for me, I, like most people, went on the rat race and continued doing what I thought was right until I actually developed really bad anxiety and I had depression and I realized that actually this isn't life. And I went searching for an answer. And that is when I found Vedic meditation. So that quite literally completely transformed my life and gave me all of these things I've been talking about, this inner strength. Like I've lived it, I understand it. And then through that path, I then went on a trip to India last year, actually, on a retreat, which was incredible with a bunch of people that I'd never met, but they were all from Melbourne. And we had the most amazing experience with each other and getting to learn about each other, but also the culture of India and really embedding myself in that Vedic tradition and really, really understanding just the beauty and the wholeness in it and how it's such an amazing, it's a science basically. It's the laws of nature. It's about everyone having all these amazing components to us, which we can nourish and we can enhance if we put our awareness on it. So for me, this transformation for me hasn't necessarily just been about me. It's also been about my family. So my husband is also a meditator and my two boys who are 7 and 9. And we've been on this journey together. And it's the most beautiful thing because we're all growing at different stages, but we're also aware of each other and the way we interact and really making that stronger and stronger. And every day it's just amazing to see the kids shine, and they're really shining and they're really embodying a lot of the Vedic perspectives and traditions. And, you know, over in India, a man that I was with who was Indian, he would always say, it's nature, G, it's nature. Everything is nature. You are by nature. And I would come home and I was saying it all the time. And then the boys now, when we go to the supermarket or we go looking for a car spot and there's a car spot right there, they say, it's nature, Mum, nature supports. And it's like, yes, there's beauty everywhere in these tiny moments. And if we can just stop and see it and realize that we are held and we are supported by each other, but also everything around us, like it's just such an amazing feeling, and I love it, and I feel completely supported. If I was here on my own, I would feel completely supported. So it's beautiful.
And there's so much diversity between people, whether it be skin color, language, experiences, culture, all the all the differences that I suppose make us individuals and unique. How do we create community in such diversity?
Yeah, it's a really beautiful question, because there is so much diversity, and I think the biggest thing is to understand that, and really it's like taking so many steps back from your worldview and how it's been formed, and really realizing that actually you're coming in with so many projections when you speak to people, and it's how you're going to break them down. And I think for me, one of the biggest things is just having this open curiosity at all times, not judgment. So many times we can go and see we could go to a different country, or we could go anywhere, and we say, oh, that's not like us, or, oh, that's so different to the way we do it. And it's like, yeah, but it's not wrong. Like, there's so much to be learned from these cultures, and it's the way we frame our thoughts, firstly, and why we're wanting to compare. It's like we can only operate in black and white. It's like dualism at its best. Like, you're this or you're that. And we struggle in the grey as people. And we like to put people in categories and boxes. So if you can approach life with this curiosity, and for me, I remember a conversation about this in a tutorial, and we were speaking about this, and I said, for me, it's actually having the courage to speak to someone from a diverse background that you don't understand, and telling them that, and saying, hey, I'm really curious about what you're talking about, or what your viewpoint is on this. However, I'm ignorant. I don't actually know about your culture, and I really want to learn. So can you teach me? And I may say things that aren't correct, but bear with me, because I'm trying to learn. And I think if we have this conversation with people, and this willingness to be open and vulnerable, and I think vulnerability is a big part of it, and saying, hey, I don't understand, rather than that's wrong, because it's not what I do. So I think being softer in our approach, and soft in our heart, and being willing to make mistakes and own them, and say, hey, I don't understand, can you help me? I think that will go a long way to breaking down these barriers, and creating these spaces where it is based on learning, like it's based on sharing rather than lecturing, and having a right or a wrong, because there is no right or wrong. There's just difference, and that's beauty. And we've got a lot to learn from Indigenous cultures, especially our own Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. Like, there's just so much rich knowledge and wisdom, and if we could just sit in that space, and it may be discomfort for some people. And I think if you can sit in that discomfort and be aware of it and not be triggered, that's the beauty. It's having that distinction between you and them, and this space in between where you don't feel comfortable and you feel like your buttons are being pushed, but you sit in it and you absorb and you learn, and you realize that actually we're all human, and we all just have different perceptions, and we can, once you break down these little walls and these little barriers, you can get to the part of the person which is the same as you.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? So it's really growth is in that area of discomfort. Like, if we just stayed in our comfortable little bubble with the same people that are the same as us doing the same things over and over again, there's never any growth. And honestly, I wonder if there's any point to really being here if we're not growing, if we're not experiencing new things, if we're not learning. Sure, we do the same old, and everything's comfortable and we can just scoot on through life, but we haven't learned anything. We haven't gained anything. And I honestly believe that's why we're here, and we're here for that kind of experience.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I think our whole purpose here is to evolve. We're here to become an evolutionary better version of the person that arrived. And in doing that, you have to be aware of your limitations and where you're blocking yourself, and just open that door, and the whole world can come in then. And there's just so much beauty, so much to learn.
Angie, there is so much going on around us. There's famine and, political and religious wars, environmental damage, species loss, so much that, are at the hands of us as humans. Okay, so as a species, how do we come back from that? How do we start repairing the damage that we've done so, everybody can walk in harmony with the earth and all her beings?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a big question. There's a few parts to it. I think so a lot of, well, what my response will touch on a lot of the different parts that I've spoken about today. So at a political level, decisions are made to progress economic gains, basically. So corporations will drive that directive. And like I mentioned before, if we take back the power in ourselves and take the power from those places and those corporations, then they lose their structures to uphold the violence. So as an individual, even though we think we're only one person out of a sea of billions, we have the power to make the change. And we can become the change if we choose to, for example, engage in something like Vedic meditation. We can become that change, and we can radiate that peace in our local communities. And, there's going to be people within these young spaces that will become the new leaders. So they can, take that with them as they embark on that future. But if we take the power back in ourselves and take it out of corporations, then we are helping to reduce inequality and war, because so much is invested in the military and defence. So if we're changing that narrative at a level of within ourselves, and we are not standing for that change, that way of living, we will naturally be electing new people into these roles. So from my belief, our political system is a representation of us people. So if we improve, it will improve. We can't always, we can cast blame and things to some of the leaders, but they represent the people. So if we change as people, we won't elect these people into power, and other people that potentially aren't even on the radar at the moment because they don't resonate with the common belief or the common worldview will become resonant, and we will elect them, and they will have different policies and different structures that uphold their position that won't be as centered on violence. So it's a massive problem, but it's a chain reaction, and it starts at the person, and it starts at the community level, and we creating new, like if we look in Australia, for example, in our different states and territories, we can work towards becoming better ourselves, and then changing the policies and, changing that massive divide in housing, for example. Like the dream of having this white picket fence and a house that was being put in all of our minds since we were born doesn't necessarily have to be driven by such aggression. And then we have all the people that aren't in a position to afford a house, and that inequality is growing, and homelessness is growing, and violence is growing, because that is not a happy lifestyle and not a nice space to be in. So for me, I can see that this problem is massive, and I understand it is, but it's also really empowering because there's so many places to make a difference. And for me, from all of my studies that I've done, from the East and the West, it all leads to the person. So I'm going to be going out there and hoping to recalibrate people's nervous systems so that they can make better choices and make better decisions and become that change that they want to see. Because at the end of the day, you have to become that which you want, be it on so many different levels of our life, but you have to become it. You can't blame everybody, and you can't expect that it's just going to come to you. You've got to be that change. And, that's a tricky thing. And so a lot of my work will be in supporting people to believe in themselves to actually do that, because it will be going against the grain of the norm in a lot of ways until it becomes the norm. I'm hoping that what I'm going to do will become the norm, and that will be the norm to behave in that way. But, there's a process in between.
It's beautiful, Ange. Cool. Ange, I'm really looking forward to working with you in the future. There is so much that, you have to offer the world. And, I think you being one of the Breaking Boxes mentors, mentoring kids, communities, individuals, whoever, I think there's some really beautiful potential here.
Going in, clear the noise. We're going through the feelings. You'll make it out by going